Hello everyone, this is Toby from Toby's Urban Sketch, and today we are sketching this scene. So we're doing a bit of direct watercolour painting. We're going straight in there with a big brush and then adding some colours, making it interesting, making it loose and happy, and then adding some structure with a brush pen. So this is an ink and watercolour sketch done slightly differently to capture this interesting scene. If you enjoyed, please do like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think of this style and if you enjoy the process. So let's start by sketching this scene. So I'm going to do a little bit of a spray on my page. That should be just enough to get this area quite damp. And the reason we're doing that is because we're going to be doing some direct watercolour sketching, and then we're going to be introducing a bit of pen afterwards. This time we're going to be using a bit of brush pen as well as our normal fountain pen. I'm going to start with this sort of slightly moody sky, and we're going to use the sky to actually create our shapes. So what we're going to have to do is negatively paint everywhere that we sort of want our buildings to end up, and that's going to just involve taking a little bit of care and mapping things out. So we can still draw the buildings though with our brush. So we can get, there's a little triangle building coming in at the edge here, and we can also just accept that, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. So we might have some areas which, if we were sketching it normally, we'd have done a bit differently, but it doesn't really matter in the end, does it? It's all about just creating an interesting image and having a bit of an experiment with it. Also, with things like this tower, it's quite dark. It's actually got a higher value than the surrounding landscape, so well, the surrounding sky rather, so we can actually paint over that in the end if we don't get it exactly right. I'll show you what I mean by that later as we get further into the sketch. We've also got all this tree coming in, so what we're going to do with the tree is make it into a bit of a feature. If we just finish off the sky a little bit more, some nice textures by dropping in a bit of our colour. So here I'm using, by the way, moon glow for the basis of the sky, and then a lot of the other colours are sort of things I've been using in my palette, so quinacridone sienna and a little bit of perylene violet as well. You can pop in a little bit of quinacridone up in the top. We can get this really moody, interesting sky going. And just finish off, do you see the edge of the reference? We've got a couple of buildings sort of finishing off here. And then I'm also going to get the bases of the buildings in here, because we've got this kind of edge which runs around. It's like a covered area for people to sit in, but we can actually get that in at the very beginning because it's a nice sort of straight edge. Then we can almost get some sort of dry brush-like textures coming in across here. And before you know it, you've got this kind of gap just begging to be filled with a lovely building, but you can already see the shape of the building. I'm going to just create a bit more light by pulling some of these shapes, making them a bit softer. And that's, I think, all we need to do. And then this lovely tree as well, which is a major part of the scene, that we can bring in with just big shapes. Because it's nice and wet, it will naturally balloon out. We can also pop a little bit of our quinacridone in it. Do you see it's got nice orangey tones as well as these greens. So let's just show that off. And we're not going to draw the stump yet, the trunk, because what we need to do with that is a nice bold line. And if we do that now, it's just going to filter in to the rest of the surroundings. So that's the big brush done. Now it's time to move to a very small brush, a size 6. Very small brush for me at least. Size 6. I'm going to mix some quinacridone sienna with a little bit of a magenta, and hopefully going to come up with a nice warm red, a bit like these bricks. And from that red we can start adding in our walls. And we're not too fast if we're getting it exactly right again, but just try and find this big shape. So particularly in this main building, we've got this kind of big shape of red wall kind of looping round, haven't we? So if we just bring that in, and then behind it we've got this more sort of yellowy wall just at the side here, and that can sit under, and we've also got a similar idea above the red, but it's got a lot of white in it, so we can leave that just to sit as a little void of colour. We get a little bit more quinacridone sienna, so we're just basically finding shapes but also varying our wash all the way as we go, and we can just start pulling in some of these other walls and other shapes and just soften in a few places. And you see how we just can create light by softening. We just create this idea of light flowing through the image. Behind the tree we've got little segments of wall sort of sneaking out, haven't we? So just get those ideas in, and then same on this side. We can just block in, like you can't fully make out what's going on, so we can just block in these ideas of rectangular perspective walls coming towards us. Okay, and we haven't done the roofs yet. So the roofs, I'm going to use a Perylene Violet here, and we're going to just be quite bold with our colour, but things are going to sink together, and that's fine. And just see where we leave these nice white gaps. So be bold with white space. We can fill white space later if we need to, but we can't create it. So take some risks, or perceived risks at least, and leave some of those lovely white spaces. We can just change up some of this Perylene, because at the moment it's just all one colour, but we can easily change it up by adding in a little bit of, say, indigo in this case. And just starting to create those shapes, starting to bring some sort of structure to the looseness. We can do the same here, so just changing between a bit of indigo, a bit of Perylene, and just bringing in these ideas of rungs coming across. It doesn't have to be exactly what's in the reference. And actually I'd argue this reference a bit of an uninspired image, but I liked the way it sat together with this big tree in the middle and this other building off to the side. Now this spire, just going to do gently. Going to leave lots of light. Can even pull out some light for the other parts of the spire, and we'll let that dry a bit before we add our ink to try and bring out the structure. Just a couple more suggestive lines while things are nice and fluid. We can just start suggesting some windows, just little light touches, and this is very much wet on wet painting, which I got to say I find very exciting and fun and risky, and it's the kind of painting which gets me feeling happy, feeling like a real artist. Just a few more little dots of colour here and there. Remember, we can always come back and add more if we want. It's just nice while things are wet on wet to get a lot of this colour in. And there we go. So let's let that dry and then come in and see what we can make of it, how we can structure it with a bit of ink from a brush pen. Now, as we come in to add structure to this, we'll be using a brush pen. So this has got some India ink in it, and it's got a lovely flexible tip, which means you can do fine lines, bold lines, almost like dry brushing as well. What we need to bear in mind is two things: our reference and the image we want to produce, and the colours and the shapes that we have produced with this wet and wet painting. And they're the two things which need to work together to come to a sort of wonderful, let's call it wonderful, conclusion. So I'm just going to start on the right hand side of my image, and I'm going to start by suggesting some of these shapes have more structure, but leaving these white spaces. And this is where I'm paying more attention to what's happened here than the reference, because these colours have moved. These peripheral buildings aren't super important to my finished image. They don't need to be accurate. I want to take from the reference, of course, but it doesn't need to be a sort of rote copying of the reference. It's more about the feel, and the feel is what we did with these lovely loose colours. So I'm just going to work my way in gently, and when we have these down, these buildings and these windows, we're starting to understand the quality of line work which we can apply to these important structures. And we're pretty much there. So that's that side down. I'm going to do the same now over here. So just pulling in these shapes, using what's happened on the page, not being tied to it, but also not being sort of tied down to the reference. Trying to consider the perspective, but also just considering the shapes and a sort of flow and quirkiness to the image that we're looking for. And then we kind of can move in, so we can start building the main aspects. And this is where we spent a bit more time. We've got this kind of red and yellow, and do you see how we've got all these soft edges because we just popped the yellow in at the top there. So these edges are soft, there's lots of light. We've got areas that we can use for our windows. That's like these white patches here and here. We've also got areas we might want to just darken and maybe even use our finger just to smudge in some of our ink to create a bit more tone where there's a lot of light at the moment. And if we're trying to make this semi-realistic to the image in front of us, then we need these kind of areas of slightly darker tone, like these little bits of hedge just sticking their heads up behind. But we don't want them too dark, we don't want them too black, too cumbersome. So just explore. Use your fingers as a brush, use your brush pen as a brush. You might even play with a brush pen and some water or something fun like that. Now this is where we come to our really loose top, and you can see I'm going to have to change it a bit because what I did is I forgot to put in this sort of cube of base. I got too excited and I forgot to put that in, and no worries, so we can change things, so a bit of our artistic license. And because this is so loose, we just lift up the top and we just get this idea of this lovely sort of spire just projecting up and glossing into and blending into this moody, interesting sky. We can move across and we can't really see what's going on. What's actually happened there is they're doing some building work, so they've got a sheet in front of the building which has got some windows on it. So what we're actually looking at is a picture of some windows covering the real windows. Gets a bit confusing to try and copy that. So this is again our artistic license. We've got this image, we've got this. We can build, you know, what do we want this to look like? And as long as we keep it simple and don't try and be clever, so just a few little windows, well, you know what? It looks fine. Just spotted a nice little detail to add here, and here would be these dark windows in the top. Now this lovely tree, that's where we've got to move to. So it needs a base, so let's start with that. We can see the base needs to lead into the middle, and let's just soften that base out. We don't want it to be a hard object, so just use our finger again. The trunk itself can be a hard object. It is, it's well defined, it's dark, but it kind of fades as we go up, doesn't it? It just becomes broken and you just get little patches of it, and it goes all the way to the top. And then we can build some of these shapes. You can see it's got quite distinctive looping branches, so we just build those in. Just take them up and up, leaving lots of nice patches where there's other things going on that we can't yet see in our image, but we can add in a moment. And again, don't be afraid to come in and blend, and it's just another way of softening, using our finger and using it as another tool. Just remember, if you go down to the fridge, nice white fridge door, wash your hands before you open it. That's my one tip for post blending your ink like this. But there we go. That is a a start of a tree done. So how are we going to finish the tree? Well, we're going to come in with some bold colours. We're going to take some quinacridone gold, which we've already used in a few of these. Well, we use quinacridones anyway in a few of these places. And we're just going to stab it in. Just stab it like that and let our brush create all sorts of interesting shapes. Before we do too much, we clean our brush off. We come and soften. Again, just using that kind of almost stabbing motion. Don't go over the ink too much, but a little bit is fine. So this ink will not be water fast, it will move. And I want it to move a bit, but I don't want it to move everywhere. So going into the ink a little bit is fine, but just being aware and not overdoing it. And this way we're layering and layering up these colours. We're layering it up and it's becoming a 3D object on a background of these fascinating houses. So let's keep doing this lovely little bit of sort of textural work. And I do this thing all the time, so it looks very bad for the brush, and I often call it brush abuse, but I've had this brush, it was a Christmas present I think 3 years ago, and you can see that point is still absolutely fine, despite the fact that I do this kind of brush abuse, as we'll call it again, all the time. So as long as you're sensible, as long as you then straighten your brush out, you don't overdo it, then this shouldn't be anything other than a lovely shortcut, lovely quick gestural way of producing lovely shapes for trees and bushes. And again, I'm kind of softening now, but I'm softening with some quinacridone on my brush, and that gets us still moving towards this dappled effect. I'm being careful to leave some uncovered dark as well as some of the uncovered background colours. Now, I know people don't always love a splash, but I very often do, especially for a tree and especially for something like this, standing proud in the front, doing a few splashes and letting it, looks like the leaves are sort of scattering and glowing, or at least that's the feel I get from it. So that's why I enjoy doing this kind of splash. Now we've got this tree standing proud in front of everything, glowing into the surroundings. If you wanted, you could add a few touches into the buildings. You could just do a couple of loose touches, implying a bit of shadow, for example, like this. You could do more. You could go and do a whole second layer. You could treat it more like a watercolour painting if you wanted. For me, I think a few touches, so that we've got all this hard, interesting textural stuff going on here. Just having a few of those touches and suggestions in our buildings, I think, is important for making it look like a joined up image, but not having too much. And I regret probably that red. I think I preferred it when it was a loose and wishy-washy tower. So paint nice and wet, you can always come in and pick stuff up. So you don't have to be tied to a decision you made and regret it, like that one. I made it, I regretted it, we've removed it, no problem. I'm going to do a couple more splashes now that we've got the colour down and the lines. We can create a bit more interest in this kind of foreground. We can add a little bit more of a shadow under this tree. Kind of blends the base in a bit more. And then the last thing is just to provide, we've got this kind of structure coming in front, and we can provide that with a little bit more, well, structure. Just gives a more complete image to have this barrier just hardened up a bit. And there we go, that is a sketch done, a lovely watercolour and ink sketch, this time direct watercolours, a brush pen, treating the brush pen really like a small brush which we've just used some dark or concentrated pigment on the page with. And there you go, a really quick 20-minute sketch of an interesting, quite complicated scene, but without any fuss, without any hardship. If you enjoy this, please do let me know, and please do subscribe as well. About half of my viewers are subscribed, which is amazing, but just over half aren't. And more subscribers means bringing you more content, which I know you're enjoying, and just a huge support to my little channel. So if you do enjoy, if you want to see more, please do like and subscribe. And thank you very much, and happy sketching.